All right, I'm going to share my screen here, and we will go through the PowerPoint together. Feel free to add to, supplement to your notes as I move along. So we'll start here with probably what is one of the more recognizable images, not just during World War II, but in the entire 20th century. Show of hands, how many people have seen this image before? I see virtually every hand go up. To my point, right? One of the more recognizable images in the entire 20th century. And we'll end with this here today in the PowerPoint section. Obviously, this is Rosie the Riveter, representing the push to get women into the workplace. And why is that? Well, because the United States on the home front is converting its economy into a wartime economy. Part of that is due to the use of the War Production Board. That's going to be a government agency that is converting the peacetime industries into war production. And what the United States has is the ability to manufacture wartime materials like perhaps no other nation at that point in time. Pretty remarkable stat here that by 1944, the United States is producing more than doubled those of Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. That would be the primary reason why we say then that the war is what is able to officially get the United States out of the Great Depression. And you'll be able to see this through the graphs that I'll show. Obviously, we had talked about FDR, the New Deal, and that push to get people back to work. But it's the mobilization for World War II that really pulls the country out of the Great Depression. And of course, that is led by and large through the push of women getting into the factories and working in many of those defense plants. Take a look here at the U.S. Navy warships, especially between 43 and 45, the peak of the war years. You have an extreme amount of production that's going on there. Going from automobile manufacturing, huge decrease, and a bit representative of the conversion into tape production. Again, looking at the peak years there, 43 is at its peak there, as the United States is gearing up for the D-Day invasion. And then let's look at what happened to unemployment. Huge spike down, and then look at the wartime wages, huge increase there. And that is something that then the United States will have to deal with post-World War II, is how do you convert your industries back into a pre-war or a post-war phase. All right, so let's spend a little time here talking about the technology of the war before we then turn our attention back here to some of the individuals and groups that are making contributions to the war effort. In the early goings of the war, Germany clearly had the upper hand. And, in 1939, 1940, that was definitely indicative of the success that Germany was having in the war. Part of that was due to this item that you see over on the right, the Enigma, the secret coding machine that was used by the Nazis, that the Allies were desperately trying to break that code. The coding system that existed in World War II, the technology with things like radar, sonar, are areas that are only going to be expanded upon into the 1950s. And so really you could look at this technology wave that exists in the second half of the 20th century, getting its start during the World War II era. The Bombay, which was a breakthrough in decoding and deciphering the Enigma messages, would then give the Allies somewhat of an advantage. And it was greatly improved by the British scientist Alan Turing, who is depicted through the film The Imitation Game there, played brilliantly by Benedict Cumberbatch. So if you have not had a chance to see the film, I would put it on your must-see list. Here's the difficulty then. Once they have broken the code, they then don't want to reveal to the Germans that they've broken the code. Why is that the case? Jack?
Then they'll change the code.
There you go, right? Then they'll catch on, right? They'll change what they're doing on the Enigma. So, as a result of that, they may get prior knowledge of, battles that are going to occur in particular locations, and they have to allow them to, happen. Otherwise, it would lead the Nazis on that they had inside information. So they do use that to their advantage, but, it's a difficult position to be in. How do you, essentially allow these battles to continue, in order to kind of keep your secrecy? The Bombay would then be improved to what you see over on the right, the Colossus, which was the first programmable computer. And this is part of the reason why I said that tech boom of the 1950s could widely be traced back to World War II. Those computers that were developed in this particular time frame, long term, lead to what we have today. Another decoding mechanism that was utilized, the American Magic, which helped to break the Japanese coding system. And then further code breaking. You have the women code breakers that were very pivotal, and the Navajo code talkers that were very significant with regards to what was going on in the Pacific theater and helping the United States on some of those island battles. Back over to the home front here in the United States and focusing on a couple of particular groups of people. Let's start with African Americans. Roughly 1 million African Americans joined the military during World War II, but were still serving in segregated units. And in most cases, at least in the early years of the war, they were serving sort of menial roles. They were cooks, they were ditch diggers. That would change as the war progresses. And part of that pivotal change was going to be through the Tuskegee Airmen, the first all African-American flying unit in the United States military. They were thrust into action widely because of the urging of Eleanor Roosevelt. She had gone down to Tuskegee, Alabama, actually flew with one of the pilots, and came back and told FDR that he needed to get these men into action. By 43, early 44, they are going to start to follow the scope of the war in Europe. They will start in Northern Africa, they will proceed into Italy, and then by late 44, 45, they're going to serve as bomber escorts into Berlin. And they would end up being one of the most decorated units in all of the war. And so it is through their accomplishments that this would lead them to further progress post-World War II. And so here are the Tuskegee Airmen then, pictured together, distinguished flying crosses for several of the men. And a big part of the experience during World War II for African Americans, you could say, helps root the civil rights movement, that a lot of what transpires during and then immediately after World War II helps pave the way for the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Speaking of that then, A. Philip Randolph, remember that name, right? Because he is trying to organize a march on Washington here during the course of World War II. He's trying to put pressure on FDR to get African Americans working in the defense plans. FDR probably doesn't want a few 100,000, protesters, on the mall in Washington, D.C. when he's trying to present a united front in the United States. So he gives in to the pressure that is placed upon him from Randolph and will sign Executive Order 8802. This would eliminate the discrimination in defense industries based on race, at least during that time, during World War II. It would also lead to the Fair Employment Practices Commission, trying to ensure protection for these workers in those particular jobs. That particular agency would become a key cog of what we would then see as the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Going back to Randolph, although this march didn't take off, there is one that he will be behind that you may be a little familiar with some 20 years later, the 1963 March on Washington. Most people know about MLK and the I Have a Dream speech, but don't realize that A. Philip Randolph is instrumental in getting that march to succeed in 1963. Finally, CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, another organization that was developed to try to use nonviolent techniques. Keep that phrase in mind because it will come back again when we're talking about the civil rights movement. Established by Mr. James Farmer. Mr. Farmer, would be a leading figure in the civil rights movement, organizing things like the 1961 Freedom Riders. So this is part of the reason why I'm saying is that some of the roots of the civil rights movement are grounded right here in World War II. Then over to Mexican Americans, who during the course of the Great Depression were actually being pushed out of the United States because of the lack of jobs that existed. And we saw that in many of those programs that were developed through the course of the 1930s, that they were favorable to single white males. Well, now we have the reverse happening. The Bracero program was trying to bring people from Mexico back into the United States so that they could take the place of workers on those farms, specifically out in California. You see the image over on the right, that was representative of the zoot suit. And at one point we had these American sailors that came back off the coast of California, that led to the zoot suit riots because people felt that these zoot suits were un-American. They were un-American because you can see they use up a lot of fabric, right? They were accused then of, utilizing this fabric that could have been applied to things for the war. There's the image of sort of the aftermath of the zoot suit riots. You see the sailors wielding bats. And it won't be the sailors that'll be arrested. It would be the Mexican Americans that were arrested during the course of the event. Finally, where we started. Rosie, right? This was part of the propaganda campaign that was trying to convince women to join the war effort in the factories. And another aspect of where we see World War II having a significant influence decades later would be for women. It would be people like Betty Friedan, who in her groundbreaking book in 1963, The Feminine Mystique, would look back to what the experience was like for women during World War II, and then sort of in the 1950s, then going back to that old sort of cult of domesticity and finding out that many women enjoyed a level of independence that they found during the course of World War II, and eventually would see by the late 1960s the push for a women's movement and that fight to gain gender equality that obviously we are still dealing with today. All right, I'm going to stop sharing at this point, and we're going to take a more specific look here at the African American experience and what was going on for Japanese Americans during the course of World War II.